That was my mistake. We're right here. Uh, Umar was once looking for a test of a specific verse of the Quran. He vaguely remembered. To his deep sorrow, he discovered that the only person who had any record of that verse had been killed in the Battle of Yamama, and that the verse was consequently lost. That's in Sunan Abu Dawud, Kitab al-Mishhaf. And so that's said. Ibn Umar, recorded in As-Sayuti, says, "Let no one of you say that he has acquired the entire Quran, for how does he know that it is all? Much of the Quran has been lost. Thus let him say, I've acquired what is available." Now this is Ibn Umar, who's the son of the second Caliph and the brother of the Prophet Muhammad. And so you have these kind of statements being said because the Quran is oral at this point in time. It's not a written document. It's a memorized document. And so this starts the process at the Battle of Yamama. We also have Abu Bakr, who himself recorded in Sahih Bukhari, book 6, says, "So I started looking for the Quran and collecting it from what was written on palm stalks, thin white stones, and also from the men who knew it by heart, till I found the last verse of Surat al-Tawbah, repentance, which Abu Khazaimah al-Ansari and I did not find it with anybody other than him." So they're looking for this particular verse in the Quran. They can't find it with anybody except one person who survived at the Battle of Yamama. And so that means that there were verses that were only memorized by one particular individual that were like known in the community, but there was only one person who had it. What's to say that there weren't other verses like that? And so starting with Abu Bakr, you have this period which ends with Uthman. And Uthman, the other caliph, in 635, starts a process where his advisors come to him and they say, "Save this nation before we differ about the book," talking about the Quran, "as the Jews and Christians did before us." That's Sahih Bukhari. And so you have this, period of time where Uthman is realizing that Abu Bakr started this process of collation, but the problem is now they have written Qurans that differ with one another because people are remembering things slightly differently. And there's a record of Qurans being longer with some people and shorter with others. And so this is a period that scholars of the ancient Near East and Islamic history records as being referred to as the Uthmanic revision, where Uthman collects all of these copies, he standardizes the text, and he destroys the differing copies. There's a later writer, Al-Kindi, in the 9th century, who I think this is a little bit hyperbolic, but this is kind of the narrative of how this happened. Heavy penalties were threatened against the disobedient. All the leaves they could secure were shredded and boiled in vinegar till they were sodden. Nothing remained, not even the smallest fragment that could be deciphered. This is talking about the Qurans that differed from Uthman's. Ubay ibn Ka'b, who was one of the immediate companions of Muhammad, said, "Umar said Ubay was the best of us in the recitation of the Quran, yet we leave some of what he recites." So he's one of the best reciters, but they're leaving out some of what he recites, what he's remembered from the Prophet Muhammad reciting. But Ubay says, "I have taken it from the mouth of Allah's messenger, and I will not leave it for anything whatever." And we actually have disagreements with individuals like Ubay ibn Ka'b, of individuals who had entire chapters that Uthman did not include. And so there's a little bit of a battle. In fact, if you read between the lines in the hadith, it appears that a few of these people, potentially Ubay himself, lost their lives because of their refusal to give up their copies of the Quran that they had recorded, as Ubay says here, taken from the mouth of Muhammad himself. And so what do we do with this? Well, if you remember, the free transmission of the New Testament has a number of factors, one of which is that there is no centralized authority who's controlling the text, which means that in one sense, it's annoying because you have all these copyist errors, but in another, it allows us 2,000 years later to compare the copies and do internal and external analysis to be able to have a lot of confidence in the text. That is not what we have with the Quran. What we have with the Quran is a oral document, right, in its originality, that was memorized by the immediate followers of Muhammad. And then we have not a spider's web, but a single thread. where there's a little bit more differentiation at first, but then it's standardized. This is literally the difference between a controlled transmission and a free transmission. And the reality of this is that it allows scholars, and this is why guys like Fred Donner say what he says, very little confidence to be able to trace the original text back, because you have to trust that Uthman got it right. And a lot of the Qurra, a lot of Muhammad's own immediate followers said Uthman did not get it right. And so we have the hadith themselves, the Sahih hadith, the reliable hadith, even recording individuals who were companions, immediate companions of Muhammad, declaring Uthman's text is not what they heard from Muhammad. But Uthman's text, or a version of it, a 1924 Egyptian printing of the Hafs version of it, is what modern Muslims read today. It is. There's no debate about that. And so the problem with that is that there is very little to no transparency and very little confidence that we have what originally came from Muhammad's mouth. If you look at a Greek New Testament, so this on the screen is a critical edition of the Greek New Testament. I have a number of them behind me. These are all critical editions of the Greek New Testament. What you have on the top is the Greek. This is a section of Matthew chapter 5. And you have the Greek up there, and underneath you have what's called the critical apparatus. This is a documentation of all the differences that would affect translation. Anybody can buy one of these. You can go on Amazon and get them. You can get your local Indigo to order one. In fact, if you are studying Greek, you can just call the United Bible Society and they'll just send one to you for free. This is the history of the New Testament text. We are not hiding anything. We're not. Everything's transparent. You can look at the readings yourself. Any true variant that affects translation will be mentioned in any modern translation as a footnote. And because of this, there is transparency. There's an ability to see what the history of the text looked like and how it was changed over time. And that gives us confidence to look back and see, how we can compare and trace the original text back. There's no critical edition of the Quran. There have been attempts to sort of do it. One of my personal friends, Andy Bannister, who has a PhD in Islamic studies from Oxford University and does computer coding. He's been on the team that's working on software it's called the Quran Gateway, and it is an attempt to try to start this. But we have 2,000 years, 1,800 years, arguably, of textual critical conversations with the New Testament, of comparative analysis. The textual criticism of the Quran has really only started in the last 50 years. And it's even closer to the latter half of the 50 years. And so there's very little to go off of in order to be able to accurately represent what the original text means. What does this mean? Okay. I think what it means is that we can have confidence in the text of the New Testament, not in spite of the evidence, but because of it. And the Quran has much, much less on its side in terms of multifocality and tenacity and therefore reliability as a whole. This is the conclusion of almost every Islamic scholar in the West who analyzes this information. Why? Because if we apply the same standards to the New Testament or to Homer or to, the author of Gilgamesh or to the Canterbury Tales, if we use the same methodology and say we can be sure that what we have is what the original is an almost exact, if not exact, representation of what the original author said, and we apply that same methodology to the Quran, what we see is a controlled transmission. We see very little to no multifocality. We see very little to no tenacity. And therefore, our ability to have confidence that what we have is what the original was is very, very low. And that includes all of the internal and external sources in the Hadith that say a number of times by the companions of Muhammad that there were differentiations in the earliest recitations of the Quran, significant differentiations to the point of chapter differences.